Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Lewis. We are quickly approaching the June 24th Democratic primary for mayor of New York City, and the pace is picking up. The polls have consistently shown one candidate, Andrew Cuomo, with a clear lead, but he still is supported by less than a majority of voters. Undecided seems to be doing very well with about 22%, and everybody else, about 8 candidates now, are trying to get on the radar screen. They're trying to get some attention. They are trying to get elected. One of these candidates, Jessica Ramos, is seeking to become New York's first woman mayor and first Latina mayor. She was born in Elmhurst to an undocumented seamstress and a printing pressman. She worked for a city councilman, Hiram Montserrat, later moved on to work for Mayor Bill de Blasio, and then ran for the state Senate and won in 2018, rising to become chair of the Senate's Labor Committee. Jessica Ramos joins me now for the inaugural first ever videotaped podcast episode of You Decide. It's going to run on Spectrum News and on YouTube. Welcome. Very good to see you.
It's an honor, Errol. Thanks for inviting me and having me first.
Okay. Well, tell us why you are running. What's this all about? Why are you a candidate for mayor?
Well, I'm running for mayor because I want to build on the progress that I've achieved as legislator and really use the platform and tools that the mayor's office would give me to tackle affordability in a way that is inclusive and keeps New York City for everyone. I think we're at a critical juncture. Everybody can agree on that. And affordability is definitely the buzzword of this election season. But we have found New York City to be unaffordable to most for a very long time. Even pre-pandemic, we had already said the rent was too damn high. Well, I'm adding now that the wages are too damn low. Even though I successfully fought and won an increase to the minimum wage that is now going to be annual because I tied it to inflation, it's still not a living wage. It's still not able to help New Yorkers cover the bare minimum. And of course, no matter how hard you're working anyway, it doesn't seem like it's amounting to much. And there's, of course, external factors in terms of housing, in terms of healthcare, in terms of public safety that are top of mind to New Yorkers. And, well, given the challenges coming at us from the federal government, I think we need someone who is ready to be both strategic, not just about throwing rocks, but who's able to play chess with that administration.
So you mentioned the legislation that raised the minimum wage. What tools does a mayor have to deal with affordability?
Well, the mayor, first and foremost, in terms of housing, has the ability to protect rent-stabilized and rent-controlled tenants by making the right appointments to the Rent Guidelines Board. Right now, we don't have enough tenant voices on the board, and that has led to steady increases that have led to displacement in many neighborhoods and have increased gentrification across the city. So that is, at the bare minimum, something that can be done in order to freeze rents. But honestly, when you talk to landlords, even the small, especially the small ones, there's also been an increase in the cost of operating and maintaining buildings. I mean, the cost of water has skyrocketed under Eric Adams. The property tax law is still not being adhered to. The city still gets sued. It's at the crux of inequality and unaffordability in my eyes, and why I'm running on reforming it, which I suppose is not really reform when I just want the city to comply with the law on the books. We haven't had the political will to do that yet.
Okay, so you've got an ambitious agenda. You are a sitting state senator. What made you take the decision to go from the already considerably powerful post that you already hold to trying to become the hands-on day-to-day manager of 300,000 employees?
Well, I want to show the city that we can have a working class mayor born and raised in our city who doesn't only speak to the struggles, fights in order to solve those struggles. I've been very fortunate in winning so many of those fights, but I know them so well because I've lived them myself, right? As a daughter of formerly undocumented immigrants, being the first American born in my family, my older sister was born in Colombia, having gone to public schools, being a public school mom now, having young teenage boys who are now taking the subway by themselves. I think I have a perspective, a lived perspective of this city that resonates with a lot of voters, and I believe it's my time.
Okay. Tell me the story of your community. When and how and why did Colombians begin arriving in New York in big numbers?
So Colombians started arriving at first in the 1950s, really, to Jackson Heights, and then it just skyrocketed by the 70s when my parents arrived. They came fleeing a lot of warfare, civil war, turmoil between liberals and conservatives post 1948 in Colombia, which is when the Civil War started. And then there was, of course, the paramilitary, the guerrillas, and the drug cartels. And those are some of my core memories as a child in Jackson Heights, is remembering so much of the violence. The war on drugs was really happening on the streets. The Daily News had dubbed us the cocaine capital of the world. The crack epidemic was happening on Northern Boulevard in East Elmhurst, the black homeowning civil service neighborhood. There were a lot of challenges, and somehow we've been able to persevere with reforms. I mean, this is why the repeal of the Rockefeller drug laws, Assemblyman Jeff Aubrey, right, who's a treasurer, an institution in my neighborhood, really championed and brought our stories into the legislature. And for me, he's been a tremendous inspiration for me since I was young. But it was very hard. I mean, I had classmates who disappeared when I was a little girl, and I didn't understand why. I would later come to learn that some of them had been used as drug mules.
Wow.
It wasn't easy. I mean, the cartels were killing journalists. Manuel de Dios Unanue from El Diario La Prensa on Roosevelt Avenue and 83rd Street while he was having lunch.
Right, killed right there in Queens.
Killed right there.
Yeah.
There's a triangle named in his honor across the street from the restaurant. No longer exists. It was called El Mesón Asturias, and that's the story of a group of people who have fought and really tried to make a good name for ourselves. We've always wanted people to know that Colombians are really hardworking people. My father, who had a radio show, was very passionate about this. He actually started getting letters from men who were incarcerated at Otisville, at Fort Dix in New Jersey. They didn't have any family members to visit them during the holidays, so we became their family. My dad inadvertently started a prison visitation program, and that's how I spent a lot of my childhood weekends. And, he helped found the Colombian Parade on Northern Boulevard and so many other institutions that are still very much making an impact, a positive impact in our community. And I've wanted to bring that experience and really build upon what the pioneers did in my community in a way that really resonates with everybody.
So it sounds like there was activism in the house right there in front of you.
My dad was a community board member.
How about that?
Yeah.
How about that?
Prior to, so when I was working at 32 BJ, I was a member of Community Board 3. But a few years before that, my dad had retired for Community Board 3. He served a few years. So I've been very aware about land use issues and community divisions. And, I wish I knew how many hours of my life I've spent at community board meetings.
No, it sounds like you didn't have even much of a choice. They kind of just brought you up in this whole thing.
I was dragged along to all sorts of meetings. You can only imagine in a place as diverse as Jackson Heights. And I fell in love with the meetings. And I fell in love with the people.
And that's what led you into public service then?
Yes. Having gone to Hofstra, I actually majored in international business, and my plan was to become a corporate lawyer and finally make money so that my family could really make it and stay in the middle class.
And instead you went to the community board meeting.
And instead I went to the community board meetings and, became a labor activist and just fighting for more opportunity and more money for my people.
Sure. Well, it's a shortcut. You don't necessarily have to go to law school, right? You can get in the fight right there in the street. So tell me about an example of a problem, either as an activist or as a senator in whatever capacity, a problem you fixed in Jackson Heights that you think would apply citywide, that you think like the next mayor should have in their background.
Well, we've had a lot of issues throughout my tenure, and ones that I didn't feel prepared for. The obvious one being the pandemic. We were the epicenter of the epicenter. My birthplace, Elmhurst Hospital, becomes, a hospital that's at 237% capacity. Remember, a certain governor had closed a bunch of our hospitals in Queens over the past 25 years. So we were just going above and beyond. We have a community that has a lot of migrants, a lot of families that are doubled up, tripled up. I have lots of shelters in East Elmhurst. And so there was an issue with access to food because when the shutdown took place, restaurants started closing down, and a lot of these immigrants were not able to access any sort of safety net. So you might remember that my freshman year, I had passed the Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act. Mm-hmm. So at the height of the pandemic, when we start to notice that so many of our neighbors were hungry, my team and I called every single farmer that testified against my bill. And we asked them if instead of throwing away the food that wasn't being purchased, they would give it to us. And we established a beautiful partnership that inspired the Nourish New York program. But we were receiving around 30,000 pounds of food a week.
Right. I remember you went up there in trucks and brought the stuff back.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it really made a difference, especially for families with children. And then there was the Excluded Workers Fund, right? People are getting unemployment insurance. The federal government even takes care of freelancers through the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, PUA. But there was nothing for people who didn't have a work permit. And landlords don't care if you have papers or not. Right. The supermarket doesn't care whether you got papers or not. So I did what everybody told me was impossible. I went for $3.5 billion in order to create this fund, and I won $2.1 billion for an excluded workers fund that people were able to access if they could prove loss of income.
Okay. So those are great items on a resume for people to know about as they consider who they might want for mayor. So let's talk about now why you are running when there is an incumbent. Why do you think that Mayor Adams should be fired? That's basically what a candidacy of your kind is implicitly saying.
I mean, I suppose we still have to talk about this, but the man has been charged with several crimes. But more than that, I think he's been leading a grossly incompetent administration. And I say that acknowledging that there are many people there, even to this day and throughout his tenure, who are true public servants and even who I had the honor of serving with. So I don't want to paint that with a broad brush. But the fact of the matter is that the mayor, as the CEO of the city and of city agencies, is supposed to set the tone and establish the vision for the rest of the city agencies to implement. But the fact of the matter is our roads look like Swiss cheese because of all the holes. Our schools have been grossly defunded, and our District 75 schools have especially been neglected. There are trash cans missing all over the place. It seems like there are fewer sanitation pickups. There is, I think, a core tenet in the relationship between taxpayers and government that is very important to me, which is I don't mind paying taxes as long as the services I'm supposed to receive are being delivered and are being delivered well. That has not been the case over the past 3+ years, and this is why Eric Adams deserves a primary.
He is not participating in the primary. What does that say to you?
Well, I think that was a choice, and we'll see how he fares as an independent. It doesn't change his dismal approval ratings. I think, perhaps he started out well. I think the way he decided to campaign was more cronyism and kind of that was gone from a certain era of New York, and kind of brought the NYPD along to boot, at a time when we had finally at least tried to put the stop and frisk era behind us. So for many of us that grew up in the 80s and 90s, it seemed like the tide was turning at a certain point, but then Eric Adams just brought it all back, and it seems like the city has regressed.
You mentioned cronyism, and I'm, to the extent that his character, the sitting mayor's character, has been called into question, issues of honesty, truthfulness, and so forth. I'm reminded that, and I mentioned it briefly, that you worked for a guy early on in your career, Hiram Montserrat, who turned out to be a bad guy. He ended up in prison, and so forth. How do we keep people like that out of public service, or how do you detect them before they get into a position to do harm to themselves and others?
Oh, it's so hard. I mean, he was the first Latino elected official in Queens, and so many people, me included, looked up to him. I thought working with him, was an incredible opportunity at such a young age, and nevertheless, he didn't want to pay me a living wage. I mean, I worked there from 06 to 08, and I was paid $18,000 a year. I only worked there for 2 years. It turned out that he was doing all of these other things that I wasn't really privy to. And luckily, I left to work in the labor movement that was going to pay me a living wage, and completely changed my career and my perspective as to how this city works, especially because I left to Local 371, the city's social service workers union, right? All licensed social workers and community titles in the public sector, fighting Bloomberg, who didn't want to settle any contracts, which I think is one of the biggest responsibilities of a sitting mayor, is making sure that we are at the table with our public sector unions, and making them feel like all of their work is respected, dignified, and properly compensated. Now we have a lot of issues with the retirees, but it also opened up my world to what happens at HRA, what happens at ACS, what happens at all of these alphabet soup agencies where social workers change the lives of so many New Yorkers, and whether or not a mayor is providing them with the resources they need.
So let me stay on the character question for a minute. So in your opinion, and we could call a lot of other names of people who have ended up in serious trouble, including legal trouble, is it a question of people who are bad going into politics, or is the problem that people size up the situation, see that there are openings, that there are, sort of gaps in which they can start to defraud the system, and then they start to go bad?
Politics attracts a lot of interesting personalities. I mean, I think there are people who really want to be famous and are seeking a career in elected office in order to get the pictures, get the headlines, and that's what they're obsessed with, and not necessarily arriving at specific outcomes.
That's interesting.
To me, public service, and I think I've said this to you before on a different occasion, to me, public service, it's almost akin to clergy who are supposed to take a vow of poverty. I am not here to make a buck.
Right.
Yes, I want to be, paid a salary, and I want to be paid, especially while we're negotiating a budget, because it's been a month. But I want everyone, all of my neighbors, all of New York City to be paid. I want people to be self-motivated by the fact that they know that if they work hard, that if they play by the rules, good things will happen to them. Doors will open. There will be more opportunities. hopefully they'll be able to buy a house.
Well, so now this is interesting. So now, is that a story you're telling, or is that a life that you have lived?
That is a life that I live, but that is the lives that are lived by my peers and so many New Yorkers I know. I mean, there are countless stories about people who, got their degree, became experts in their field, and somehow just can't afford to buy $1 million home, especially if they're swamped with student loans.
Right.
We were really done up in a way, and now we're at this critical juncture with this particular election, which I largely see also as intergenerational passing of the baton. At some point, we have to make sure that government is adopting technology to be much more efficient, to make services much more accessible. I always say when I talk about universal child care, how come I can open an app on my phone and make a reservation at a restaurant, but I can't find someone who is certified to take care of my child if I'm in a pickle?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, there are a lot of those came out at a recent forum. Those same kind of questions came up that, you can apply for $1 million mortgage on your cell phone and get an answer, a preliminary answer at least, within minutes. But if you're trying to sign up for, like food benefits for your family, much different,
why don't we
much
have
harder.
Presumptive eligibility?
Yeah.
If I know that you do qualify for SNAP, how come we don't automatically sign you up for the Fair Fares program, which is so underutilized?
Right. No, very true. When you mention intergenerational, I'm thinking of that other candidate in the race for mayor, which is Andrew Cuomo.
I've heard of him.
And yeah, you've heard of him. Well, do you think of him as a quasi-incumbent? Do you think of him as, sort of part of the status quo, or what? Where does he figure into this race?
He's a quasi-incumbent in that we already know what type of executive he is. And I would say that he has, tremendous name recognition. So many people vote for him largely because they respect his father and his legacy, and rightfully so. Andrew Cuomo is no Mario Cuomo. And I think the history books will show that. And I think this is an opportunity for us to make a decision about what type of politics we want to have in New York. Do we want the politics of the past that seem to be so much about bullying people and triangulating situations in order to plot and scheme in a way that leads to more power for yourself, but not necessarily in moving the needle towards solving a crisis? And I will give as an example the housing crisis. Andrew Cuomo was HUD secretary. He was attorney general. He was governor. He touts a 40-year career in tackling this crisis. And yet there is today more homelessness in New York than we have ever had before. So I'm here to say that there is such a thing as the wrong experience. Yes, you could have been wrong for 40 years. You could have had the wrong priorities for 40 years. You could have had the wrong approach for 40 years. And it's time for there to be a new era of leadership that is much more data-driven, that is compassionate, but that is squarely focused on delivering a strengthened middle class for New York City.
So tell me what happens if everything goes your way. You're sworn in on January 1st. What do you do about the housing crisis?
I have a plan for day one.
Let's hear
it. Day one, I want to declare a mental health state of emergency in the city of New York. And that's not a symbolic thing. It would allow me as mayor to be able to access different funding streams in order for us to prioritize the reopening of the mental health institutions that Andrew Cuomo himself closed. So he created this mess. The MTA is the de facto mental health facility because of the way he mismanaged the MTA, at times not even admitting that he was in charge, except for when it came to the 2nd Avenue subway and some ribbon cuttings, right? But the point is that we should be able to have these institutions so that we're helping those struggling with severe mental illness to the services they need without having to plead guilty, hopefully without having anybody gotten hurt. And it's necessary. That's where we start to tackle the homelessness issue. And then thinking about the supportive housing units that are available, and because many are vacant right now. I don't know how this administration had someone at a city council hearing testify that nobody's sleeping on the street, because clearly New Yorkers are. And then there are supportive housing units available, and we're not helping them get there. And it's a waste of resources, but clearly, we also have to build more. I also want to prioritize the repair of the 5,000 plus NYCHA apartments that have been warehoused by the city, right? 200,000 people long list, waiting list. These are all opportunities that are right in front of us, talking about tackling homelessness and housing without even getting to tax abatements for big real estate and without even thinking outside of the box, different ways that we can leverage other monies to foment more development, particularly along the future IBX, and making sure that there's real opportunity, not just for low-income rentals, but for modest equity homeownership opportunities.
Tell me about how you feel about the tech industry, the financial industry, sort of the backbone, sort of the money-making core of a lot of the New York City economy. My sense of this is that folk like you who have come from the grassroots and have worked in a lot of either government or community organizations, or in your case, labor, don't necessarily have like sort of a close feel for what it is these folks are trying to do on Wall Street, what kind of money they're trying to make and how they're trying to make it. And they feel that you're across a divide that needs to be bridged at some point.
Well, I did do 3 years of business school where I took finance and accounting and management and all sorts of, business perspective. I have a great respect for the fact that New York is one of the financial capitals of the world. I mean, some of our top grossing businesses are Goldman Sachs and the like. And if you read my universal child care bill, you'll see that I actually want to work with them very closely and incentivize them to help us bring universal childcare into fruition. I mean, we're talking about, those firms with payrolls over $250 million a year, which are almost exclusively financial companies in this city. So I understand that there is a role for everybody. I'm saying that opportunity right now has been siloed for sectors such as, but not exclusively, the financial sector. And the love's got to be spread if we are truly all going to be safe, if we are all truly going to live in a city that makes us proud block by block.
Let's talk a little bit about empowerment politics. You would be a breakthrough candidate if you're successful. We've never had a Latino or Latina elected to any citywide office. My memory of this goes back to Herman Badillo's campaign for mayor in 1985, which I know was the year you were born. So you probably don't remember that. You probably don't remember that.
But I know so many stories.
Well,
yes.
and you probably were paying attention and maybe were aware when Fernando Ferrer
I was very much
ran
aware
in 2005.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the next chapter in that story? I hear this from time to time. I wonder whatever became of what had been a real sort of active agenda. I felt that was, a big part of almost every discussion of citywide politics. I don't hear so much about it anymore.
An active agenda, a Latino agenda?
Latino empowerment, yes.
Well, I think like every other community, the Latino community is not a monolithic community.
Of course.
Right? There is no community that is. And the Latino population has been changing. I mean, Puerto Ricans are pioneers, as are Dominicans. But by and large, there are more South Americans and Central Americans every day. My district alone, of course, we are a 68% Latino majority, nearly 99%, anecdotally, are South American Latinos or Latinos of South American descent like myself, that have, very different lived experiences. Some of us are more indigenous than others. Some of us come from a much more working class background than others. People had to do all sorts of things to come to New York City and be able to survive. So I think those experiences will continuously change. Mm-hmm. Actually, for me, when I sit and think about the evolution of Latinos in New York City, I really challenge myself around how is it that we can break the immigrant generational amnesia that happens in New York when all of a sudden, there's a new group of people who are the migrants, and somehow now we're too good for snuff.
Right.
And that just cannot continue to be in a city that will always be revived by a new crop of entrepreneurs, of professionals, of people willing to do backbreaking work in order to make this the greatest city in the world.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I've felt for a long time that one of the big kind of underlying stories that we all have to sort of do better at addressing is the way we treat the migrant families and migrant communities, immigrant communities. City of immigrants, everybody says it. It's like, sort of like the creed of the city. But then you look at the way people get treated, and it's like, this is disgusting.
I mean, my favorite is people are, well, my parents came here the right
way.
Right. And what does that actually mean? And obviously not everybody who says those words is a student of history, unfortunately.
Right.
Because there are reasons why certain people were allowed to come here the right way.
First of all, half of it is utterly untrue. I went through this with a historian of immigration who, people talk about, oh yeah, we learned the language in a generation. And it's like, bull.
Bull.
The monolingual.
The language is where I think there's the key. Can I say that? So I actually think, and this might, give voters an idea into the way I think about education, but I think in New York City, every single child should speak at least 2 languages.
Of course.
English and their native language, whatever that means.
Sure.
I think it's a terrific way to combat white supremacy. I think forcing all of us to speak another language, and heck, maybe even a third language, if we were to start a little earlier in the public school system instead of waiting until middle school, I think we would be able to combat white supremacy and actually force people to remember and reckon with their own personal history and how each and every one of us, without exception, deserves dignity and deserves respect. Because in the era of climate change, guess what? People are fleeing floods, people are fleeing droughts, people are fleeing warfare, people are fleeing all sorts of things that, unless we do something about them, those conditions will only be exacerbated and lead to more migrant influxes. So as the city of New York, as the mayor of the city of New York, wouldn't I have the responsibility to put systems in place so that if and when that happens, we are able to cope in a much more streamlined way? And this is actually one of the many reasons I loved Fiorello LaGuardia. I think he profoundly understood this as the son of immigrants.
Sure.
I don't know that many of my future predecessors understood that.
Well, yeah, he had the advantage of being, Jewish and Italian and German and everything else.
And spoke all of those languages. Brilliant, man.
5 and 6 languages.
I think we were about the same height, too.
They said he would cuss you out in German, Yiddish, or whatever other language came to mind. But before I let you go, what's your path to victory? I know you spend a lot of time, because that's how campaigns are run, working to stave off what could go wrong. But tell us what could go right. What's the best case scenario between now and June?
what can go right is that working class New Yorkers who have seen this city transform, who have survived everything we've gone through, come out and vote because they feel that I'm the candidate whose message resonates with their lived reality and their desired future. I'm here to say our future is bright. I know we're going through a tough time. I cannot tell you, no matter where I go in this city, and actually even across income brackets, by the way, by and large, people tell me they're not sleeping well. And we have a tremendous anxiety because of the collusion between Eric Adams and Donald Trump. Any way you slice it, it impacts everybody's life one way or another. And I feel that we can look to govern in slogans and pretty pictures, or we can make a choice to say we deserve a mayor who has lived our struggles, who understands our streets and the people on them, and doesn't shy away from a good fight, that is willing to take on controversies, taboos, and figures like President Trump at a time where people are burnt out. And we're just sick and tired of the same old, same old. We want something new. We deserve something bright and shiny. And we're only going to get there if we finally decide to steer away from both the far left and the far right. The pendulum swinging too far either way and swinging back so fast also has us with whiplash. And we need stability. We need to be able to empower people with opportunity and give them the stability of knowing that investing their time, efforts, blood, sweat, and tears will be worth it because the next chapter of New York City is just going to be that great.
Okay. We will wish you the best of luck. We'll see you out on the campaign trail. Stay in touch.
Errol.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Do you want more conversations with the people who are shaping the future of New York City and beyond? Check out our New York One podcast channel in the description. And hit subscribe to let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues.